Sam Shamoun sitting in an airport.
Yes.
An atheist recognizes you and he sits next to you. And
Yeah.
he goes to you, convince me that there's a God and convince me that he's your God.
Yeah, this isn't getting settled in an airport lounge, especially when Sam's god is like the world's worst celebrity. Billions of galaxies, unlimited power, yet his last public appearance was a blurry 2,000-year-old story from the desert. He got worse attendance than Bigfoot. Almost like it was all made up. Anyway, let's hear it.
My first step is say, here's how you're going to prove that the God of Christianity doesn't exist. Falsify the origin of the church.
So Sam kicks things off by going full academic interrogation mode, ambushing the guy with a surprise PhD exam on early Christianity. Because apparently if you can't recite ancient cult history by heart, his religion wins by default. Never mind the fact that every religion has an origin story stitched together from gossip, myths, and a few conveniently missing scrolls. But fine, you want a natural explanation for how your church started? Let's try. A Jew named Jesus was probably broke, bored, or both, and figured he could dodge taxes and get free meals if he claimed to be an apocalyptic preacher. Back then, Judea was full of chosen ones. It was basically the influencer meta of the first century. He got a few investors in the cult, and a few genuine followers like any startup religion today. Then he got cocky, tried to expand the brand, maybe take it global. The Romans weren't having it, so they shut it down the Roman way, with wood and nails. And since the Romans weren't running a respectful funeral home, they likely tossed his body in a mass grave. His closest followers realized the movement didn't have to die. I mean, why go back to fishing when you can build a movement and lead it? Someone, probably Peter, cooked up the comeback story. It was a rebranding opportunity. The Messiah plot twist no one saw coming. Well, except the guy writing it, of course. As people bought into it, the story got better with each telling. It instantly upgraded them from failed cult to divine franchise. With zero editorial oversight, followers were free to upgrade the story as needed to win over superstitious, miracle-hungry, first-century audiences. If someone hesitated, no problem. Just sprinkle in an angel, toss in a miracle, maybe an empty tomb or a surprise group appearance. Need drama? Add a weeping woman. Need credibility? Say 500 people saw it. Paul joined in later, saw the momentum and the career potential, and rebranded the whole thing for non-Jews. He was a former enforcer for Team Torah, but saw Christianity gaining traction and thought, hey, why fight the trend when I can lead it? So he flipped sides, claimed he saw a light, and started writing letters. Decades later, people finally started writing the story down. No eyewitnesses. Just theological fan fiction, edited by people who never met Jesus but definitely had a message to sell. The church eventually picked the versions it liked and ghosted the rest. Once the movement grew and started organizing, the leaders needed a clean, unified story, so they canonized the Gospels that best fit their agenda, and quietly let the others rot in history's recycle bin, as they were often suppressed, lost, or not copied as much. And since writing was expensive and rare, the others were labeled heretical and either destroyed or forgotten. Eventually, the empire adopted it, and that changed everything. That's when Christianity really takes off. So Sam, we good? Yeah, didn't think so. I can already hear the background hum, but that's not what the Bible says. The Bible is historically reliable. To which I'd respond,
so he thinks the New Testament is generally reliable and that we can therefore use it to establish facts that most historians would actually reject. That means that before he can even argue for the resurrection, he first has to defend the historical reliability of the Gospels. That means proving traditional gospel authorship, that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John actually wrote the accounts attributed to them. Early dating, that the Gospels were written early enough to reflect firsthand testimony. Textual transmission, that the Gospels were preserved without corruption. Legendary development, that later Christians didn't exaggerate the story. Undesigned coincidences, that the details confirm historical reliability. And then 6 supposed contradictions. He has to also show that the alleged inconsistencies in the gospel don't undermine credibility. If you can see the point here, this is a huge burden on anyone who wants to argue for the resurrection. If any single one of these elements is undermined, the case for the resurrection is weakened.
Paul says, if Christ has not been raised, give up your faith. Go party.
if believing fairy tales is the only thing stopping you from clubbing, that's a red flag, my friend. Paul's ultimatum is like a kid saying, if unicorns aren't real, I'll eat broccoli. It's dramatic, but it proves nothing. Muslims say if the Quran has a single error, Islam crumbles. Yet here we are. It seems Sam is about to present the resurrection as evidence. But it only counts as evidence if you first assume it actually happened. Otherwise, it is just another claim, not plausible, not probable, and certainly not something we can treat as historically certain. It is a claim that openly contradicts everything we know about how the natural world works, something that has never been observed or verified under any reliable conditions. And the only source for this extraordinary claim comes from carefully selected and pre-approved gospel accounts written by anonymous authors with a theological agenda.
So if tomorrow they were, and it's never going to happen because Jesus is alive, he's almighty, he is alive, he's reality. But let's say tomorrow they found the bones of our Lord and they proved it. Father would now have to stop being a priest, because Paul said, and me and Father would go to the nightclub.
Notice the dodge. It's never going to happen because Jesus is alive. That's conveniently unfalsifiable. If someone did unearth a first-century tomb with an ossuary labeled Jesus of Nazareth, Sam's ready-made retreat is, that can't be him, he's alive. Satan must have planted it. Meanwhile, Sam's obsession with nightclubs is really coming through.
Give me some naturalistic explanation for the origin of the church, because the followers of Christ claimed that man who was beaten, bloodied, buried, appeared to them alive physically, and the tomb was discovered empty, and that appearance convinced them he's now alive physically, and they're willing to be killed for that claim.
Skinned alive, crucified upside down.
Yes. Yeah, that's what so convince me how the church began by giving me an explanation that rules out the resurrection.
This is like saying, explain Superman without Krypton. Easy, it's called fiction. Sam demands that you explain church origins without upsetting the same hand-picked scriptures that casually toss in zombie invasions, talking snakes, chatty donkeys, and a biblical Rambo who wipes out 1,000 guys with farm animal leftovers. Yep, real historical gold right there. Your gospel authors weren't historians, they were ancient fan fiction writers on a mission to sell a savior. We don't have a single reliable historical source quoting Jesus directly. Not a single one. A natural explanation is that the earliest followers didn't talk about any beaten, buried, and back alive plotline. That came later as the myth snowballed. Or maybe a few of them simply made it up, saw a chance to cash in on influence, fame, or just good old-fashioned control. Like every cult leader since the dawn of time. Risking their lives, people do that all the time for glory, power, or a paycheck. Ask any soldier, mercenary, or modern influencer. At some point, Christians need to realize their holy book isn't a history book any more than the Quran is. It's just the ancient world's version of a flashy marketing brochure. Big promises, miracle highlights, and zero fact-checking, just like every other holy sales pitch.
History has a test that when you have false messianic claimants, when they're killed, their movement dies. Or their followers are killed with them, and that's it. I mean, here, I'll give you an example. Bar Kokhba, Bar Chosiva. He was a 2nd century messianic claimant who led an uprising against the Romans. And there was a rabbi named Rabbi Akiva who called him Bar Kokhba, meaning the son of the star, a messianic title. Because he thought, oh, that's our Messiah. It's around 130s AD. He got vanquished and crushed like a grape. Does anyone talk about him?
Yeah, Sam, you're literally proving my point while trying to make yours. You're the one talking about Bar Kokhba right now, so no, he didn't just disappear into history's trash can. His movement didn't just die, it triggered a full-blown refugee crisis, reshaped Jewish history, and became a symbol of resistance for centuries. Sure, no one's worshipping him today. But if someone had slapped a Son of God label on him and added a resurrection story, do you really think people wouldn't follow? Humans are wired for that kind of thing. Just look at how Muhammad rebranded Jesus for billions of Muslims today. Christianity didn't survive because of the resurrection story. It survived despite the crucifixion. Paul took a failing Jewish apocalyptic cult, scrapped the tough bits like circumcision and kosher laws, and turned it into a market-friendly product for non-Jews. It wasn't divine truth, it was savvy business strategy. So no, movements don't die or live based on truth. They thrive on power, adaptability, and lucky timing. Christianity caught the empire. Islam built its own. And Bar Kokhba? He didn't have an empire, just bad luck against Rome.
What would lead Greeks, Gentiles, to stop worshiping Zeus and Hermes, stop going to the temples and sacrificing, being imprisoned and killed for it, to call on the name of a Jew who wasn't even one of their own ethnically, whom they knew had been killed 20 years earlier? What in the world would cause them to do that?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe the same thing that leads hundreds of thousands of Western women, born in liberal secular societies, to ditch Christianity or atheism every year, to cover themselves head to toe, and pledge loyalty to a 7th century misogynistic warlord they've never met, while happily willing to die for him. Even join ISIS bridal camps in Syria. Humans don't need rational reasons. They just need a good story, social validation, and a bit of FOMO. You're wondering why pagans converted to Christianity? Sam, have you seen how Islam started? The real question isn't why people converted. It's why you think your religion's spread was special.
Without the resurrection, there is no good answer.
Mm-hmm.
Resurrection is the least simple explanation. It demands breaking every natural law we know, without a shred of real evidence. Any other explanation, no matter how unlikely it is, will still be a way better and plausible answer than a resurrection. Meanwhile, the human mind is great at inventing stories, exaggerating, and believing wild things. Just look around at every other religion ever.
Even atheists have to admit, there are several atheist historians. There are historians of historical Jesus. They all admit, yes, one renowned scholar, his name is Gerd Lüdemann, and even Bart Ehrman, these are atheists, but they study the historical evidence. They all admit, yes, the followers of Jesus were convinced they saw him alive physically.
How can you seriously bring up two scholars and praise them for studying the historical evidence when both of them don't even believe the resurrection, the very thing you're trying to prove actually happened? Like, do you hear yourself? This is like calling two vegans to defend your steakhouse. Yes, most scholars agree that claims about Jesus' appearances started floating around not long after his death. But they don't describe these as people physically hanging out with zombie Jesus like Sam implies. If anything, a floating Jesus with sparkly robes and a Jedi glow would fit more into the hallucination category than the resurrected flesh and bones narrative. What scholars typically say is that people had experiences or visions, and those later got retold, exaggerated, and turned into the very physical-sounding gospel stories. I'll let Christian apologist Lydia McGrew break it down in 3 minutes.
And I'm talking about not just at some high generalization level, but, like the specific appearances. Jesus appeared on the first night, and Thomas wasn't there, and he invited them to touch him, and, those things, what's in the accounts. That is not acknowledged, even that that's what they claimed, by a large majority of scholars. Now, the reason that comes as a shock to people when it really sinks in what I'm saying is because in the minimalist case, you have the claim that the apostles or the disciples of Jesus had appearance experiences that convinced them that he was raised from the dead. And what people don't know is that appearance experience fact does not mean the appearance experiences we find in the Gospels. In other words, it'll be like, hey, we get 90+% consensus on the part of scholars across the scholarly spectrum, including liberals and so on, that they had appearance experiences. Yay, how exciting. And in order to get that large of a consensus, you have to make it just appearance experiences of some kind. So, for example, it could be, it would count, okay, if Jesus appeared to be floating, okay, like if it appeared that his feet didn't touch the ground, that would count. Or you'll see quoted, and we've got to stop quoting this, it just bothers me, Gerd Lüdemann saying something like, it can be taken as historically certain that the disciples had apparent, experiences of the risen Jesus. Yay! Wow, how exciting, Gerd Lüdemann. And then when you look, that's like taken out of context. When you look at it in context, Lüdemann says that all the physical stuff in the gospel accounts was added later as an embellishment. And he says the original seeing was a seeing in the spirit. I don't even know what he means by that. I don't even know what he means by a seeing in the spirit. Or Bart Ehrman, he doesn't even acknowledge group appearances. And he says if there were group appearances, maybe there were, but if there were, they were like seeing a figure at a distance. Well, both of those guys get counted because Ehrman says they had some kind of an experience. They both get counted in this consensus acknowledging appearances. Now, that's extremely important because if you have watered down that appearance experience claim in order to get such a big consensus on it, then it's very hard to argue that Jesus really was physically risen from the dead.
Bart even gives some names. He goes, Peter, Mary Magdalene, and a few others did actually see something that convinced them they were seeing Christ alive physically, and he's in heaven physically.
Sam can only name 2 people. That alone should raise a red flag. And even then, we don't have any direct testimony from Mary Magdalene, just second-hand stories about what she supposedly experienced. Same with Peter. No writings, no first-hand account, just hearsay filtered through anonymous gospel writers. We also have 0 reliable evidence confirming that any of these early followers were persecuted specifically for refusing to recant. All those stories about martyrdom came much later, through church tradition, with no solid historical data to back them up. Sam brings absolutely nothing verifiable to the table. No first-hand testimony, no verifiable persecution accounts, and not even eyewitnesses to Jesus' life, let alone the resurrection. What an epic fail. If there was a God trying to preserve evidence of this world-changing event, he either did a terrible job, or Satan had an epic interference streak. Either way, the historical record looks more like amateur fan fiction than divine preservation.
But then they say, well, we don't know why they saw what they saw, but they did say something to convince them that God was alive, Christ, who's God in the flesh, was alive, and then put a fire on them to go preach it and convert people and die for it.
We don't know why they saw what they saw. I'm not sure what Sam is trying to say here.
Well, if they were hallucinating, then why didn't someone produce the body?
It's that simple.
Oh great, so they do know why they saw what they saw. They were hallucinating. Thanks for clearing that up. Gerd Lüdemann accepts that some followers had experiences of seeing Jesus after his death. But his reasoning is based entirely on how common hallucinations are, especially after trauma or grief. That's his whole justification. If you rule out hallucinations and insist these appearances were real events, then Lüdemann's reasoning completely falls apart. You can't quote him in favor of a resurrection when his entire explanation is built on natural causes. It's like someone claiming they saw a giant flying dragon breathing fire. You'd probably say, okay, maybe they think they saw it, because hallucinations happen. But if you block out hallucinations as an option, now you're stuck with the claim itself. And we have 0 evidence dragons exist. The more you rule out natural explanations, the less sense the story makes, not the more. Very easy to see how flimsy the argument is the moment you step outside the echo chamber of confirmation bias and religious dogma. As for why didn't someone produce the body? Well, to produce a body, someone first needs to actually ask for it. We have 0 contemporary records of anyone demanding a body. More importantly, the Romans couldn't have cared less about some tiny fringe cult. They weren't wasting resources digging through mass graves to prove a random preacher stayed dead. The followers back then were a small, powerless group. No one saw them as a threat yet. And even if you believe there was a tomb, which is already questionable, there are way simpler explanations. Body moved, misplaced, stolen, or the wrong tomb entirely. Plenty of normal explanations before jumping to Magic Man defeated death.
Yeah, because the proclamation, here's what's so beautiful about Christianity. The proclamation of Christianity did not start in Rome. It started at the very place where Christ was killed, in Jerusalem. The last place you can get away with Christ being raised is the very place where thousands of people are still there who had either seen or had family members tell them, because they were there, Christ was killed and he was buried. The last place you're going to get away with that he's been raised is there. Because all they need to do is produce the body. But no body, right?
No
I
body.
mean, I can go into the arguments for the empty tomb, but I'm simplifying it.
First off, there's 0 solid proof for an empty tomb. That's not even part of the famous minimal fact Gary Habermas loves to parade around. Now Sam here is stacking assumptions. He assumes there were many people who actually witnessed the events and would care enough to challenge a fringe group. He also overlooks how small the early Christian group was, likely just a few dozen people at first. He ignores the chaotic historical context, as Jerusalem was a violent, politically unstable city with frequent unrest. A random preacher's death wasn't a major public event. And so, why would the Romans or Jewish leaders go out of their way to recover the body of this executed criminal? Cults don't need to pass local inspection to survive. They thrive when they evolve, rebrand, and find new markets. Christianity moved its HQ to Rome, built itself up with slicker theology. If local scrutiny killed bad ideas, we wouldn't have astrology columns today. At the end of the day, Sam's big argument boils down to believe it, because I can't think of a better explanation. Sorry, but I can't explain it doesn't equal God did it. That's textbook argument from ignorance, and every religion plays that game. So next time a Christian corners you mid-flight demanding you to falsify the origin of the church, just smile, hand them this video link, and say, I could explain it, but it wouldn't fit on a boarding pass. Until then, I'll see Sam at the nightclub. Cheers.